Rome was a big city, and big cities have similar problems and force you into similar situations the world over.
You've got this immigrant-based city with constant influx of people, this cheek by jowl of all these different cultures, these different religions, all of whom at the same time are deeply proud to be Roman. So you've got an incredibly dynamic but also incredibly diverse city.
Rome was much more of a wild and chaotic metropolis than it's often thought of as. One of the interesting things to try and get right is the relationship between free people and slaves.
How happy, eh? To be a slave.
To a degree, they have free will.
Make no decision.
But it creates a whole different set of dramatic situations.
How very restful it must be.
You've got to bear in mind what being a slave in ancient Rome really meant. You got an incredibly wide range of experience in being a slave.
How could you treat someone like that? If it can't hack being a slave, they can kill themselves. And it's an honourable thing to do if you don't like being a slave. So you don't accuse me of having slaves. This person has allowed themselves to be a slave.
You know, a Roman would kill himself.
I will kill Octavia, and Merilla turns to me, but if she cannot and I am taken alive, then you must kill me. And then you must kill yourself. Your survival would be inappropriate.
I wouldn't think of leaving, Domina.
He's like the butler or the steward, but he's one of the most powerful and rich slaves in the house.
5,000 denarii. That much?
But he's still a slave.
Ruined. That idiot has ruined us all. We shall have to leave Rome.
What's wrong, Mother? Will that be all, Domina?
There were appalling conditions for slaves. The huge state-run farms, the mines. You went there, you'd give you 3 months, you might survive that long. But that's a tiny fraction of slaves. Many slaves are living in complete conditions of trust alongside their masters and mistresses, and very often they're freed.
This was a very cosmopolitan city. Rome had already conquered much of the known world, and so there were people of many ethnicities who came in, both slaves and freed people who came in and intermingled with Roman society.
No one knows how many slaves there were in comparison with what you'd have to call free people in Rome, but it's a very, very high number. Some people have suggested it's as much as 70%.
Think of how Rome was built. Thousands and thousands of people that literally died in the building of Rome.
People they brought with them. I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of slaves. So that, to the point where they had one person just for the drapes, one person just to polish statues. And if they did it wrong, you just took him out and replaced them.
Slaves, they were maybe the most important aspect of the city. Without them, the city couldn't exist.
Without the underclass, there is no upper class. They couldn't live in their houses, they couldn't eat, they couldn't dress, they couldn't do anything.
Attia and Servilia are both constantly attended by a body slave who is a personal slave. And it would be responsible probably for overseeing things like hair and makeup and their general demeanour and comportment, but is also there just as a constant companion.
Merula is my body slave, which was a woman that was with them at all times, from when they went to the bathroom to if they made love, to at all times, even in your most intimate moments.
They do your makeup and your hair, but then they like stay with you all the time. All the time. Well, that's a little too close for comfort for me.
Daughter left. Well, just now I put a boy to following her.
She's a sort of a black soul of her, you know, is always present. She knows everything in the house. She knows everything of the private life of these people.
She's probably known me since I was a baby and is like my mother. I care for her and she looks out for me. And should anything happen to her, I might surprise myself and feel one little tear roll down.
There are small and meaningful exchanges, and you're to imagine that this body slave has been around for quite a long time and is in a position of trust.
I long to be together and alone with you.
I'm a body slave to Servilia. I'm very close to her. When she asks for my opinion, I'll give it.
Great affection.
He could not say love.
Would you have him pluck a harp? He's a soldier, not a poet.
The day dwindles. I guess he'll be arriving.
There's an intimacy there. I'm older than her. I've suffered. She's suffering. I'm loyal. It's a fierce loyalty.
These people were just there to service your life, and they were very lucky because they're in a position which should be respected, and they're living in a beautiful house and being fed and clothed.
Basically, buying slaves was a business that took place in a gigantic market at auction.
Well, slaves were basically like buying a car.
55, 55, 60, 60, 60, sold!
If you had one slave, that was okay, but if you were a three-slave house, then it showed your prosperity.
It's all skin and bone, eh? You want a good price. Let us feed them up, put some fat on them. A couple of weeks of easy living, and these puppies will sell like duck hearts.
You can get second-hand slaves, unfortunately. There's also a rental slave market, so you can rent slaves for the day or for the week. And there's also a top end of the market. Being a cook or being possessed of a lovely singing voice, or perhaps also just being possessed of great physical beauty.
They were just objects. I mean, like a table or a chair, just your property to do whatever you wanted with.
It gives a sense also of the way in which I think Romans might have regarded slaves, which is curiously complex. It's both that they weren't really there, they didn't really count.
Come to sell my stock.
But on the other hand, they were also really human, and they were people whom you could feel real emotions towards, and you could really even come to love.
Who's that? Your father brought him back from Gaul to keep.
We're selling him as soon as he gets some colour back.
Some slaves had a certain amount of status. If you were a very well-educated Greek, you'd be incredibly expensive, for one thing, and you'd be a very valued asset to whoever owned you and probably treated fairly well.
It's probably the only time in history that the captors, i.e. the Romans, became the captives because they worshipped everything Greek.
They were used as administrators and treasurers and trusted advisors to many of the leaders.
Posca here thinks I should accept truce. Make peace.
In exchange for what?
Caesar has a special relationship with his slave Posca.
Peace is its own reward. Snivelry.
Caesar trusts him implicitly.
If I'm not a tyrant, if I merely seek legitimacy, why would I not accept such favorable terms?
He refuses to meet us in person?
In the end, Caesar actually says, if I don't come out of this battle, I just want you to know you will be a free man.
The great prize held out to all slaves in Rome was the possibility of being freed.
He's here.
There's a lovely example on one tombstone. Someone is memorializing a young boy who died at the age of 17, and it simply says, once a slave, now a son. And I've always thought that summed up the attitude that the Romans had towards their slaves, which is that you could progress all the way from being just something that was bought and could be sold to being something that was essentially part of the household, someone about whom you had for whom you had real affection and for whom you felt real emotions. There was a Roman dream, just like an American dream. You could make it. This bench here, with the awning over it, is a place where the people who came to pay court to the great master of the house, they would hope that they were going to get admitted in through that door over there, and they would be allowed to go and put their petition. The person who comes out through the door is one of the most powerful and rich slaves in the house, and he had the power as to who should be admitted and who should be left outside. So that's the top end of the slave spectrum. But also outside the door, you would have seen people at the very bottom end of the hierarchy. They may well be attached to something like this. You'd be branded on your arm, or more likely when they branded you here. Maybe if you stayed here 20 years, you could graduate up from being the door slave standing here to being the rich master slave of the household, the steward, and you can come out here and give the freeborn Romans a hard time, get your own back.